They say luck is just preparation, meeting opportunity. But for Sabrina, luck looked a lot like a disaster waiting to happen. One minute, she was wiping grease off a table at Manhattan's most pretentious restaurant, praying her shoes wouldn't fall apart before her shift ended. The next, she was standing on the tarmac at Teterboro Airport, staring down the nose of a $65 million Gulfstream GOSA-50IR, with a man whose net worth could buy a small country waiting for her inside. How does a waitress go from pouring water to poring over classified documents at 40,000 feet in less than 24 hours? It all started with a single phone call, and the one language nobody knew she could speak. This is the story of the day Sabrina's life actually began. The rain in New York City doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. That's how Sabrina felt, pushing through the heavy revolving doors of l'Orangerie, the kind of French restaurant where a salad cost more than her weekly grocery budget. Sabrina was 24, but her eyes carried the weight of someone twice her age. Her uniform was a size too big, a hand-me-down from a waitress who had quit 3 months ago, and her shoes were cheap non-slips from Walmart that pinched her toes with every step. She wasn't living. She was surviving. 2 years ago, she had been top of her class in Slavic languages at Georgetown, dreaming of the UN or an ambassadorship. Then her mum got sick. The tuition money became medical bills, the dorm room became a futon in Queens, and the diplomacy turned into negotiating with her landlord for a few more days on the rent. Tonight, l'Orangerie was a war zone. It was Friday, and the place was packed with Wall Street bankers, tech moguls, and socialites who treated the staff like furniture. Sabrina, Table 4 needs water, and Table 7 is sending back the steak tartare because it's too cold. It's raw meat, for God's sake. That was Brenda, the floor manager. Brenda had hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde ambition and a soul made of pure, jagged glass. She hated Sabrina. She hated that Sabrina was quiet. She hated that Sabrina was polite. And mostly, she hated that Sabrina was pretty in a way that didn't require makeup. "On it, Brenda," Sabrina muttered, grabbing a silver water pitcher. She moved toward Table 4, the VIP booth in the back corner. It was usually reserved for celebrities, but tonight it was occupied by a man who looked like he owned the celebrities. His name was Julius Sterling. Even Sabrina, who didn't own a TV, knew who he was. Sterling was private equity royalty, a man who bought distressed companies, stripped them for parts, and sold them for billions. He was 40, with salt and pepper hair cut with surgical precision, and a suit that cost more than Sabrina's entire education. He wasn't eating. He was staring at his phone, his knuckles white, as he gripped a crystal tumbler of whiskey. Across from him sat 2 younger men in suits, lawyers or analysts, who looked terrified. "He's not picking up," one of the junior suits whispered, checking his watch. "Mr. Sterling, the deadline is in 20 minutes. If Volkov doesn't sign, the merger is dead." Julius didn't answer. He just stared at the phone on the table like he wanted to incinerate it with his mind. Sabrina approached silently, the perfect, invisible servant. She reached out to pour sparkling water into the empty glasses. "I don't care what time it is in Moscow," Julius finally spoke, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the booth. "I don't care if he's sleeping. Wake him up." "We tried, sir," the other suit said, sweating. His assistant said he only speaks to people he trusts. And, well, the translator we hired. He's stuck in the Lincoln Tunnel. We have nobody to interpret the nuance of the counteroffer, even if we get him on the line. Sabrina's hand faltered for a fraction of a second. "Moscow, Volkov." She poured the water, keeping her eyes down. "Don't look. Don't listen. You are just part of the scenery." Suddenly, Julius's phone buzzed, a harsh, vibrating sound against the mahogany table. The screen lit up. The caller ID read, Oleg Volkov, private. The table went dead silent. "Answer it," Julius commanded, shoving the phone toward the junior lawyer. "Put it on speaker." The young lawyer's hands were shaking as he tapped the green icon and then the speaker button. A voice exploded from the phone. It wasn't English. It was Russian, fast, aggressive, and thick with slang that you wouldn't find in a tourist phrasebook. "Slušaj меня внимательно. Ty amerykanskaya swinia. Ja znаю, kto wy pytajecie mnie obmanut z tymi nalogowymi punktami. Wy dumajecie, ja głupi." The lawyers stared at each other blankly. "What is he saying?" Julius demanded, his eyes darting between his useless assistants. "Is he agreeing to the price?" I think he's angry, sir," the lawyer stammered. "He said something about pigs?" The voice on the phone continued, louder this time. "Jeśli wy nie odwiedzicie mnie na czystym ruskim języku przez 10 sekund, ja rozorwu etot kontrakt I prodam wese kitajcom." "He's threatening to hang up," the lawyer panicked. "He's counting down." Julius slammed his fist on the table, rattling the silverware. "Damn it! Where is the interpreter? Tell him to wait. Say, wait in Russian." "I don't know how," the lawyer squeaked. Sabrina felt a cold shiver go down her spine. She knew exactly what the man on the phone had said. "If you don't answer me in pure Russian in 10 seconds, I will tear up this contract and sell everything to the Chinese." She looked at Julius. He looked desperate. This wasn't just money. This was his reputation on the line. If she stayed silent, nothing happened. She kept her job. She went home to her cold apartment. But if she spoke, Brenda would fire her on the spot. Waitresses at l'Orangerie were not allowed to speak to guests unless spoken to, and certainly not allowed to interfere in billion-dollar business deals. The voice on the phone shouted, "Piat, Shatira, try!" 5, 4, 3. Julius Sterling looked like a man watching his empire burn. Sabrina took a breath. She didn't think. She just reacted. She stepped forward, dropping the napkin she was holding, and leaned over the billionaire's shoulder toward the phone. "Gospodin Volkov, podождите." Sabrina's voice was clear, authoritative, and rang out with a perfect St. Petersburg accent. It cut through the tension in the booth like a knife. The counting on the phone stopped instantly. Silence hung heavy in the air. Julius Sterling turned his head slowly, looking at the waitress standing over him as if he had just seen a ghost. The two lawyers' jaws were practically on the tablecloth. "Kto eto? Who is this?" The voice on the phone growled, suspicious, but no longer shouting. Sabrina didn't look at Julius. She stared at the phone. She switched her brain from waitress mode to the linguistic prodigy she used to be. "Eto pomoćnica, gospodina Sterlinga," Sabrina lied smoothly. "It's Mr. Sterling's assistant. On prosit waszego proszczenia. Perewodczyk zastrial w probkę. No gospodin Sterling kochet, żeby wy znali. On głęboko uważает was I waszą pronicatelność." He asks for your forgiveness. The translator is stuck in traffic, but Mr. Sterling wants you to know. He deeply respects you and your astuteness. She paused, looking at Julius. "He thought you were trying to cheat him on the tax clauses," she said in English, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He was about to sell to the Chinese. I told him you respect him. Now, tell me what you want to offer him regarding the tax liability. Quickly." Julius stared at her. For a second, he looked at her cheap uniform, her messy bun, the name tag that sat crooked on her apron. Then he looked at her eyes. They were sharp, intelligent. He didn't hesitate. "Tell him we will cover the tax liability up to 15%, but the intellectual property rights must stay in the US. No compromise on the IP." Sabrina nodded. She leaned back to the phone. "Gospodin Volkov," she said, her tone softening, becoming almost conversational, the way one speaks to an old friend. "Господин Sterling предлагает покрыть налоговую ответственность до 15%. Это жест доброй воли. Однако право на интеллектуальную собственность должны остаться все. Это для того, чтобы защитить общий бренд на международном уровне." There was a pause. A long, agonizing pause. The static on the line hissed. Then a deep, booming laugh erupted from the speaker. 15%! Ha! Sterling не такой узкий скряга, как я думал, Volkov boomed. Хорошо, девушка. У тебя приятный голос. Ты не звучишь, как те роботы-юристы. Скажи ему, что я согласен. Мы подпишем завтра. Sabrina let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She looked at Julius. "He agrees," she said quietly. "He says you aren't as much of a miser as he thought. He liked that I didn't sound like a lawyer. He'll sign tomorrow." Julius grabbed the phone. "Spasibo, Oleg." "Spasibo," he said, butchering the pronunciation, but the relief in his voice was palpable. He hung up the call. The silence that followed was deafening. Julius Sterling slowly placed the phone down. He turned his entire body in the booth to face Sabrina. The two lawyers were looking at her with a mix of awe and embarrassment. "You speak Russian," Julius stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Sabrina said, clasping her hands behind her back, returning to the posture of a servant. "I studied Slavic languages at Georgetown before I started working here." "You just saved a $400 million acquisition," Julius said, his eyes narrowing, studying her. "You're a waitress." "I'm a good waitress, sir," Sabrina said, trying to diffuse the situation. "Would you like another round of drinks to celebrate?" "On the house." Julius opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, a shadow fell over the table. "What is going on here?" It was Brenda. Her face was a mask of fury. She had seen Sabrina leaning over the VIP table, talking to the guests, completely violating protocol. "I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling," Brenda gushed, her voice dripping with fake honey as she glared daggers at Sabrina. "Has this employee been bothering you? She knows better than to harass our VIPs. Sabrina, step away from the table immediately." "Actually," Julius started, raising a hand. "Don't worry, sir. I'll handle this," Brenda interrupted, too manic to notice Julius's demeanor. She grabbed Sabrina by the arm, her nails digging into the fabric of the uniform. "Get to the kitchen, now. Don't even clock out. Just get your bag and get out. You're done." Sabrina felt the blood drain from her face. "Brenda, please, I don't want to hear it. You were soliciting tips? Flirting? It doesn't matter. You are fired," Brenda hissed, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Sabrina looked at Julius, hoping he would intervene. But Julius Sterling was a man of business, and right now he was already typing furiously on his phone, communicating with his team in London about the deal. He didn't look up. He had gotten what he needed. The tool had served its purpose. Humiliation burned in Sabrina's chest. She pulled her arm free from Brenda's grip. "Fine," Sabrina whispered. She turned and walked away. The walk to the kitchen felt like a mile. She pushed through the swing doors, the sounds of the clattering pans and shouting chefs drowning out the sobs threatening to escape her throat. She stripped off her apron, threw it in the hamper, and grabbed her worn-out coat. She walked out the back door into the rainy alleyway. The smell of garbage and wet cardboard assaulted her. She had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal, and her reward was being fired into the rain. She walked to the subway station, counting the $7 in her pocket. It wasn't even enough for a decent meal. So much for luck, she thought, wiping a raindrop or a tear from her cheek. But Sabrina was wrong. She hadn't been ignored. She had been observed. As she sat on the R train heading back to Queens, staring at her reflection in the dirty window, she didn't notice the black notification popping up on a phone in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. It was a background check, a dossier on Sabrina Jenkins. Julius Sterling sat on his leather sofa, a glass of Dom Perignon 2008 in his hand. He swiped through the PDF on his iPad. Georgetown University, Dean's List, dropout due to family financial insolvency, IQ 142. He took a sip of the champagne. Brenda fired her, he murmured to the empty room. Good. That makes the hiring process easier. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Prepare the G650 for tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. departure, and send a car to Queens. I have a passenger to pick up. The morning sun in Queens didn't sparkle. It glared. It highlighted the cracks in Sabrina's ceiling and the dust motes dancing over her unpacked eviction boxes. It was 7:30 a.m. She had been awake since 4:15, staring at her bank app. Balance, 42.18. Rent due yesterday. She was calculating how much she could get for selling her old textbooks when a knock rattled her thin plywood door. It wasn't the aggressive pound of the landlord. It was a firm, rhythmic, professional knock. Sabrina pulled her oversized robe tighter and opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. Standing in the dim, urine-scented hallway was a man who looked like he had taken a wrong turn on his way to Buckingham Palace. He wore a charcoal suit, white gloves, and a cap tucked under his arm. "Ms. Sabrina Jenkins?" he asked. His voice was gravel and honey. "Yes," Sabrina said, her heart hammering. "If this is about the credit card debt, I am Henry, Mr. Sterling's driver," the man interrupted politely. He held up a sleek, black matte box tied with a silver ribbon. "Mr. Sterling requests your presence immediately. He has a flight to catch, and he insists you be on it." Sabrina stared at him. "The billionaire? He saw me get fired last night. He didn't say a word." "Mr. Sterling rarely speaks when he is observing," Henry said, cryptically. He extended the box through the crack in the door. "He suggests you wear this. The car is downstairs. We leave in 15 minutes. Henry placed the box on the floor, turned, and walked down the creaky stairs without looking back. Sabrina undid the chain and grabbed the box. Inside, wrapped in layers of tissue paper, was a navy blue sheath dress from Victoria Beckham, a pair of nude Christian Louboutin pumps, and a trench coat that looked like it cost more than her parents' house. There was no note, just a platinum credit card with her name on it, temporary, prepaid, and a sticky note attached to it that read, "For incidentals." Sabrina looked at the dress, then at her roach-infested kitchen. She realized she had two choices: stay here and wait for the eviction notice, or get in the car with the man who had watched her life fall apart. 10 minutes later, Sabrina stepped out of her building. A phantom black Maybach S650 was idling at the curb, looking like a spaceship parked in a junkyard. The neighbors were staring from their windows. She got in. The interior smelled of expensive leather and filtered air. They drove in silence to Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. They didn't go to the main terminal. The car drove right onto the tarmac, pulling up next to a beast of a machine, a Gulfstream G642ER, its white fuselage gleaming against the grey sky. Julius Sterling was standing at the bottom of the stairs, talking to a pilot. He wore a cashmere sweater and dark jeans, looking casually terrifying. Sabrina got out of the car. The heels fit perfectly. The dress fit perfectly. She felt like an imposter, but she walked like a diplomat. "You're 3 minutes late," Julius said, checking his watch as she approached. "You checked my background," Sabrina said, her voice steady despite the wind whipping her hair. "You know my shoe size. You know my address. That's stalking, Mr. Sterling." Julius looked up, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "That's due diligence. And call me Julius. Mr. Sterling is my father, and he's been dead for 10 years. "Why am I here?" Sabrina asked, refusing to climb the stairs. "You let Brenda fire me. You watched her humiliate me." "I needed you free," Julius said simply. "If you were still employed by l'Orangerie, I'd have to negotiate with the restaurant union to hire you for a contract job. It takes days. By getting you fired, you became an independent agent immediately. I saved us time." "You ruined my livelihood for efficiency?" Sabrina asked, outraged. "I'm about to offer you a job that pays $50,000 for 48 hours of work," Julius countered, his eyes locking onto hers. "Consider it severance. Now, are you getting on the jet? Or should I tell Henry to drive you back to Queens so you can negotiate with your landlord?" $50,000. That was her student loans. That was her mum's medical debt. That was freedom. Sabrina tightened her grip on her trench coat. "I need a contract, in writing, and I want half up front." Julius's smile widened, just a fraction. "I knew you were smart. It's already on the desk inside. After you, Ms. Jenkins." The Gulf Stream climbed through the clouds like a silver bullet. Inside, the cabin was quieter than a library. The beige leather seats were softer than Sabrina's bed. Julius sat across from her, a tablet in his hand. Sabrina had already signed the contract and seen the notification on her phone. $25,000 deposit received. It was real. "So," Sabrina said, sipping a glass of water. She refused the champagne. "Where are we going?" "Lake Como, Italy," Julius replied without looking up. "Villa d'Este. Oleg Volkov is hosting his annual summer solstice gala tomorrow night. It's the most exclusive event in Europe. No press, no phones, just the 50 most powerful people in the Eastern Hemisphere. And why am I there? To translate?" "To interpret," Julius corrected. "Anyone can translate words. Google can translate words. I need you to translate intent." He put the tablet down. "Volkov is paranoid. He thinks every American is trying to screw him over. Yesterday, on the phone, he liked you because you were rude. You cut through the nonsense. He thinks you are my high-level associate, a ruthless fixer who keeps me in check." "So you want me to play a role?" Sabrina said. "I want you to be the person you were on the phone," Julius said. "If he finds out you're a waitress who was serving tartare 24 hours ago, he will feel insulted. He will kill the deal. And if this deal dies, my firm loses $1 billion in leverage. My enemies smell blood, Sabrina. If I don't buy Volkov's tech company, Callaway Capital will." "Callaway?" Sabrina asked. "Preston Callaway. My rival." Julius's jaw tightened. "He's a shark. He'll be there tonight. He doesn't speak Russian, but he's charming, and he lies beautifully. I need you to be my ears. Volkov speaks English, but he talks to his staff and his family in Russian. He mutters to himself in Russian. I need to know what he is whispering when he thinks I can't hear." Sabrina looked out the window at the Atlantic Ocean, stretching endlessly below. "I haven't spoken Russian in 2 years," she admitted softly. "Not since my mother died. She was from Odessa. We used to speak it at home so I wouldn't forget her heritage." Julius's expression softened, the corporate mask slipping for a second. "I'm sorry. I saw her passing in the file. Pancreatic cancer?" Sabrina nodded. "It took everything we had. That's why I dropped out." "Then let's get it back," Julius said firmly. "You help me close this deal, and I'll double your fee. 100,000. You can finish your degree. You can do whatever you want." Sabrina looked at him. For the first time, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw a man who was just as desperate to win as she was to survive. "Tell me about Volkov," Sabrina said, opening the dossier on the table. "What are his weaknesses?" For the next 7 hours they didn't sleep. They worked. Sabrina memorized the names of Volkov's children, his favorite hockey team, CSKA Moscow, and the history of his company. Julius drilled her on corporate structure and the art of the bluff. By the time the pilot announced their descent into Milan, Sabrina wasn't just Sabrina the waitress anymore. She was Sabrina Jenkins, VP of Strategy for Sterling Equity. But as the plane banked, Julius's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his face went pale. "What is it?" Sabrina asked. "It's a text from my contact in Volkov's security," Julius muttered. "Preston Calloway just landed, and he didn't come alone. He brought a translator, too." "Who?" "Not a who," Julius grimaced. "A what?" "He brought Elena Krovik. She's the daughter of a Russian diplomat. She's a socialite. She's vicious, and she knows everyone in St. Petersburg." Sabrina felt a knot in her stomach. "Does she know you? Or your staff?" "She knows my regular staff," Julius said. "She doesn't know you. That is our only advantage. But if she sniffs out that you don't belong in this world, she will eat you alive in front of Volkov." Julius looked at Sabrina, searching for fear. Sabrina took a deep breath. She thought about Brenda screaming at her. She thought of the eviction notice. She thought of the arrogant look on the lawyers' faces. "Let her try," Sabrina said, her eyes cold. "I've dealt with angry customers sending back steak for 2 years. A socialite is nothing." Lake Como was breathtaking. The water was a sheet of dark glass reflecting the Alpine peaks. A vintage wooden speedboat, a Riva Aquarama, ferried them from the private dock to the Villa d'Este. The hotel was a Renaissance palace, dripping with crystal chandeliers and gold leaf. The gardens were filled with guests who looked like they had stepped out of Vogue and Forbes. Sabrina wore the navy dress, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She wore no jewelry. Julius had said it was better to look understated and confident than flashy and desperate. As they walked up the grand staircase toward the terrace where Volkov was holding court, Sabrina felt every eye on them. Or rather, on Julius. He moved with a predator's grace, nodding to people but stopping for no one. "Keep your head up," Julius whispered. "You belong here." "Easy for you to say," she muttered, though she kept her spine steel straight. They reached the terrace. In the center, sitting on a velvet sofa like a king, was Oleg Volkov. He was a bear of a man, with a thick beard and eyes that darted around the room, missing nothing. Standing next to him, laughing at something he said, was a man who was the opposite of Julius. Preston Calloway was blonde, tanned, and wore a white dinner jacket. He looked like a movie star. Next to Preston stood a woman who was stunningly beautiful, wearing red silk, holding a cigarette holder like a weapon. That had to be Eleanor. Julius stepped forward. "Oleg, good to see you." Volkov looked up. He didn't smile. He stared. Then he looked at Sabrina. "Ah," Volkov grunted, standing up. He was massive. The voice on the phone. "The one who called me a pig?" The circle of sycophants around him went silent. Preston Calloway smirked, waiting for the humiliation. Sabrina didn't flinch. She looked Volkov in the eye. "Я сказала, кто вы вели себя как свинья, Oleg Petrovich," she said in flawless Russian. "I said you were acting like a pig, Oleg Petrovich. А я была права, вы пытались нас напугать." And I was right. You were trying to scare us. The silence stretched. Elena Krovik's eyes narrowed. Then Volkov roared with laughter. He slapped Julius on the back, nearly knocking the wind out of him. "She has fire!" Volkov shouted in English. "I like her. Julius, where did you find her? The CIA?" "Something like that." Julius smiled tightly. "Come, sit," Volkov commanded, waving them to the sofa. "Preston was just telling me why I should sell to him. He says your company is over-leveraged, that you are borrowing money just to fly your jet here." Julius sat down, crossing his legs. Preston likes to talk, usually because he has nothing of substance to say. Preston Calloway leaned forward, his smile not reaching his eyes. And Julius likes to hire pretty faces to distract from his balance sheets. "Who is this, Julius? I don't recall seeing her on your board of directors." "I'm Sabrina Jenkins," Sabrina interjected smoothly before Julius could answer. "Head of Strategic Acquisition. And I suggest you worry less about my resume, Mr. Calloway, and more about the fact that your proposed merger would trigger an antitrust investigation in 3 countries. Preston's smile faltered. "Technicalities." Preston waved a hand. He turned to Volkov. "Oleg, sluchay." "Oleg, listen." Preston tried to speak Russian. It was clumsy, accent heavy. Elena stepped in, speaking rapidly in Russian to Volkov. "Oleg Petrovich, Preston offers security. Sterling is a gambler. Look at this girl. She wears a dress from last season. Her shoes have scuffs. She is not head of acquisition. She is a prop." Julius stiffened. He didn't understand the Russian, but he heard the tone. Sabrina felt her face heat up. Elena had clocked her. The shoes were from the outlet. The scuff was tiny, but visible to a trained eye. Volkov looked at Sabrina, his eyes shifting from amusement to suspicion. He hated being lied to. Sabrina knew she had seconds to recover. She couldn't deny the clothes. She had to own them. She laughed, a cold, dismissive laugh. "Elena Dorogaya," Sabrina purred in Russian, leaning forward. "I wear last season because I am too busy closing deals to shop. You wear that red dress because you are desperate to be seen. We are not the same. And as for Mr. Sterling being a gambler, perhaps. But at least he is betting with his own money, not his daddy's trust fund like Mr. Calloway." Volkov's eyebrows shot up. He looked at Preston, then at Elena, then at Sabrina. "Trust fund?" Volkov asked in English, looking at Preston. Sabrina switched to English. "Didn't he mention? Calloway Capital is backed by his father's estate. He can't sign a check over 10 million without board approval. Julius can sign for the whole amount right now. Who is really the boss here, Oleg?" It was a gamble. Sabrina recalled reading a footnote in the dossier about Calloway's board structure. Preston turned red. "That is a gross oversimplification." "But is it true?" Volkov demanded, his voice dropping an octave. "I need ratification for sums over 50 million. Yes, but—" Volkov slammed his hand on the table. "I do not deal with children who have to ask permission from their parents." He turned his back on Preston. "Julius, you and your shark come to my private study. We drink vodka. We talk numbers." Julius stood up, masking his immense relief. He offered his arm to Sabrina. As they walked away, Sabrina felt Eleanor's gaze burning a hole in her back. She knew this wasn't over. Eleanor whispered something to Preston, and Preston pulled out his phone, making a call. "That was brilliant," Julius whispered as they entered the villa. "You improvised the trust fund bit?" "I read the footnotes," Sabrina whispered back. "But watch out, Elena isn't done. She's calling someone." "Let them call," Julius said, feeling invincible. But Sabrina was right to be worried. As they entered Volkov's study, a text message arrived on Elena's phone from a contact in New York. Attached was a photo taken from the security footage of l'Orangerie from the night before. It showed Sabrina in a waitress uniform, pouring water. Elena smiled. She didn't interrupt the meeting yet. She would wait for the perfect moment. She would wait until the contracts were on the table, and then she would destroy Sabrina Jenkins. The study smelled of expensive leather, Cuban cigars, and chilled vodka. The deal was 99% done. The papers were spread out on the antique oak desk. Julius had loosened his tie. Volkov had taken off his jacket. "You drive a hard bargain, Sterling," Volkov grumbled, dipping a pen into an inkwell. "But I respect it. You don't flinch." He looked at Sabrina. "And you have the eyes of a wolf. I like wolves. Dogs bark. Wolves bite." Sabrina allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "We just want what is fair, Oleg Petrovich." "Fair?" Volkov scoffed, hovering the pen over the signature line. "There is no fair. There is only winning and—" Bang! The heavy double doors of the study flew open. Preston Calloway stood there, breathless, his face flushed with triumphant malice. Elena Krovic stood beside him, holding her phone up like a lantern in the darkness. "Don't sign it, Oleg," Preston shouted. "It's a fraud. The whole thing is a fraud." Volkov froze. The ink dripped from his pen, staining the paper. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes darkening. "I told you to leave, Calloway. If you interrupt me again, I will have security throw you into the lake." "You'll want to see this first," Elena said, her voice cutting through the room like shattered glass. "You think you are negotiating with a vice president? You think she is a wolf?" Elena walked to the large, flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. She tapped her phone screen. AirPlay connecting. An image flickered onto the massive screen. It was grainy, taken from a high angle. Security footage. But the face was undeniable. It was Sabrina. But not the Sabrina in the Victoria Beckham dress. It was Sabrina in a stained, oversized apron, her hair messy, wiping a table at l'Orangerie. A timestamp in the corner read, "Yesterday, 8:42 p.m. "She is a waitress," Elena announced, pointing a manicured finger at Sabrina. "A servant. She pours water for tips. Julius Sterling picked her up out of the gutter yesterday morning, dressed her up in borrowed clothes, and brought her here to mock you." Preston stepped forward, sneering. "He thinks so little of you, Oleg, that he brought the help to negotiate your legacy. He's laughing at you." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb counting down. Julius stood up, placing himself between Volkov and Sabrina. "Oleg, let me explain." "Is it true?" Volkov whispered. The sound was more terrifying than his shouting. He didn't look at Julius. He looked at Sabrina. Sabrina felt her heart stop. The room spun. The image on the screen loomed over her. Proof of her poverty, her struggle, her smallness in this world of giants. "Is it true?" Volkov roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. "Yes," Sabrina said. Julius looked at her, alarmed. "Sabrina, it is true," Sabrina said, her voice rising, shaking off the fear. She stepped around Julius. She didn't look down. She looked straight at Volkov. "Yesterday I was wiping tables. Yesterday I was worrying about making rent. Yesterday I was serving people like him." She pointed at Preston, "who treat people like me as if we are invisible." "You see?" Elena gloated. "She admits it. She is a peasant." "Shut up," Sabrina snapped at Elena. The force of her voice shocked everyone. Sabrina turned back to Volkov. She switched to Russian, deep and emotional. "Oleg Petrovich, they show you that picture to shame me. They think that because I work with my hands, because I serve food to survive, I am worth less than them." She took a step closer to the desk. The bodyguards tensed, but Volkov held up a hand. "Look at them," Sabrina gestured to Preston and Eleanor. "He was born into a golden cradle. Her father gave her everything. They have never been hungry. They have never had to fight for a roof over their heads. They think business is a game played at country clubs." Sabrina leaned over the desk, her eyes locking with the oligarchs. "You know why I am a wolf, Oleg? Because I am starving. Because I have lost everything, and I am still standing. Julius Sterling hired me because I heard what he needed when no one else was listening. He brought me here because he knows that a hungry fighter is worth 10 well-fed cowards. She slammed her hand down on the contract. Yes, I am a waitress, and that means I work harder in 1 hour than Mr. Calloway has worked in his entire life. If you want to sell your life's work to a soft boy who runs to his daddy for permission, go ahead. But if you want to deal with people who know the value of $1 because they have had to bleed for it, then you sign with us. Sabrina stopped, breathing hard. The room was dead silent. Volkov stared at her. His face was unreadable. He looked at the photo of the waitress on the screen. Then he looked at Preston Calloway, whose smug smile was beginning to fade. Volkov slowly sat back in his chair. "Preston," Volkov said quietly. "Yes, Oleg?" Preston straightened his jacket, thinking he had won. "How much is a liter of milk in Moscow right now?" Preston blinked. I don't know. I have people who buy 75 rubles, Volkov said. "I know this, because until I was 20, I could not afford it." Volkov stood up. He walked around the desk. He ignored Julius. He stood in front of Sabrina. He was a foot taller than her, a giant. "They call you servant," Volkov rumbled. "I call you Boets, fighter." He turned to Preston and Elena. "Get out of my house." "What?" Elena gasped. "But she lied to you." "She told me the truth," Volkov shouted, his voice shaking the walls. "She is the only real thing in this room. You bring me gossip, she brings me guts. Get out!" Security guards stepped forward, grabbing Preston and Elena by the arms. As they were dragged out, protesting and humiliated, Preston looked back at Sabrina with pure hatred. But Sabrina didn't look at him. She was watching Volkov. Volkov walked back to the desk. He didn't sit. He grabbed the pen. He signed the document with a flourish that nearly tore the paper. "Done," Volkov said, tossing the contract to Julius. "I sell to you sterling on one condition." "Name it," Julius said, his hands trembling slightly as he picked up the paper worth billions. Volkov pointed a thick finger at Sabrina. "She handles the transition. Only her. If I have a problem, I call her. If she is not there, the deal is void." Julius looked at Sabrina, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I wouldn't have it any other way," Julius said. The silence at 45,000 feet is different from the silence on the ground. It is absolute. It is a vacuum where the world below, the noise, the grime, the desperate scrambling for rent money, ceases to exist. On the Gulfstream G650ER, the only sound was the low, hypnotic hum of the Rolls-Royce engines pushing them through the night sky at Mach 0.9. The cabin lights were dimmed to a warm amber, casting long shadows across the beige leather and mahogany trim. Sabrina Jenkins sat curled in the oversized captain's chair, her knees pulled up to her chest. She had kicked off the nude Christian Louboutin pumps hours ago. They lay on the floor, toppled over like fallen soldiers. Her feet ached, her head throbbed. But for the first time in 3 years, the knot of anxiety that lived permanently in the center of her chest, the one that tightened every time she opened a bill or heard a knock at the door, was gone. She was staring out the porthole window. Outside, there was only the infinite blackness of the Atlantic Ocean and the scattering of stars that looked bright enough to touch. Across the aisle, Julius Sterling was busy. He hadn't spoken for an hour. He had been on the encrypted satellite phone, speaking in rapid-fire bursts to his legal teams in London, Hong Kong, and New York. He was securing the perimeter, locking down the Volkov deal before morning broke on Wall Street. Sabrina watched him. Yesterday, he had been a terrifying figure, a titan who could crush her with a word. Tonight, he just looked like a man who was relieved he hadn't lost his kingdom. Julius finally set the phone down. He rubbed his temples, exhaling a breath that seemed to carry the weight of the last 48 hours. He stood up, but instead of going to his briefcase, he walked to the walnut bar at the front of the cabin. He returned holding 2 crystal flutes and a bottle of Dom Perignon 1959. "You don't drink on the job," Sabrina said, her voice raspy from exhaustion. "The job is done, Sabrina," Julius replied quietly. "And this bottle was chilled for a celebration I wasn't sure was going to happen. It would be a sin to let it go warm." He sat opposite her, not in the confrontational way he had on the flight out, but in a relaxed posture, leaning back, his guard down. He poured the champagne. The bubbles hissed softly, the only sound in the cabin. He slid a glass across the table to her. "To the wolf," he said, raising his glass. Sabrina took the glass. The crystal was heavy, cool against her fingers. "To the truth," she corrected him. They drank. It was crisp, complex, and tasted like money. "You know," Julius said, looking at the liquid in his glass, "I've sat across the table from cartel leaders, prime ministers, and tech sociopaths. I have never seen anyone dismantle a room the way you did tonight." "I lost my temper," Sabrina admitted, looking down. "I shouldn't have yelled at Volkov. It was unprofessional. If it hadn't worked—" "But it did work," Julius interrupted. "That's the point. Strategies are only unprofessional if they fail. If they succeed, they're called visionary." He studied her, his grey eyes piercing. "When Elena put that photo on the screen, I thought we were dead. I was calculating the liquidation of my firm. I was figuring out how to explain to my board that I'd been outmaneuvered by Preston Calloway. I froze." "You were surprised," Sabrina said. "You didn't expect them to play that dirty?" "I didn't expect you to own it," Julius corrected. "Most people would have denied it, or cried, or begged. You turned your biggest weakness into a weapon." "Where did you learn to do that? Georgetown doesn't teach that." Sabrina turned back to the window. "Poverty teaches you that, Julius. When you're poor, people use your shame against you every day. Landlords, bosses, bank tellers. They look at you like you're a mistake. After a while, you stop trying to hide the mistake. You realize that your survival is the only thing you have to be proud of. Preston Calloway has never had to survive a day in his life. He didn't know how to fight someone who had nothing left to lose." Julius was silent for a long time. He seemed to be processing her words, re-evaluating the world he lived in. "You said you did it because you were tired of being invisible," Julius said softly. "I am," Sabrina replied. "At l'Orangerie, I was part of the furniture. If I dropped a fork, I was a nuisance. If I smiled too much, I was flirting. If I didn't smile enough, I was rude. Tonight, for 10 minutes, I was real." "You were more than real," Julius said. "You were essential." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. Sabrina stiffened instinctively. She expected a polite dismissal, a thank you card, maybe a voucher for a cab ride home. Instead, Julius pulled out a sleek, leather-bound checkbook and a heavy fountain pen. He opened it on the table. The scratching of the nib on the paper was loud in the quiet cabin. He wrote slowly, deliberately. He tore the check out and slid it across the mahogany surface, face down. "The deal was 50,000, Julius said. "If we closed, I said I'd double it to 100. Sabrina hesitated. She reached out and turned the paper over. She stared. She blinked, thinking the altitude was messing with her vision. She counted the zeros. 500,000 lashes, $500,000. The air left her lungs. Her hand started to shake. This wasn't just money. This was a house. This was her mother's medical debts, wiped clean. This was tuition. This was 10 years of safety. This was the end of the fear. "Julius," she whispered, her voice trembling. I can't. This is a mistake. You added a 0. "I don't make accounting errors," Julius said dryly. "Consider it a performance bonus. And a retainer." Sabrina looked up, tears pricking her eyes. "A retainer? For what? The job is over." "Is it?" Julius swirled his champagne. "Volkov was very clear. He signed the deal on the condition that you handle the transition. That means I can't do this without you. If you walk away, the deal collapses. Volkov doesn't trust me. He trusts the Boets, the fighter." Sabrina wiped her eyes quickly, refusing to cry in front of him. "I'm a waitress, Julius. I don't know the first thing about mergers and acquisitions. I don't know how to integrate a Russian tech firm into a US equity portfolio. I'll ruin it." "You can learn the math," Julius said dismissively. "I have an army of analysts who can build spreadsheets and calculate EBITDA. I can hire 1,000 MBAs from Harvard who can tell me what the market did yesterday. Do you know what I can't hire?" He leaned forward, his intensity returning. "I can't hire hunger. I can't hire the kind of gut instinct that knows when a billionaire is bluffing. I can't hire someone who can look a man like Volkov in the eye and tell him he's being a pig. That isn't taught. That is forged." He tapped the table near the check. "I'm offering you a position, Sabrina. Not as a consultant. As the Vice President of International Relations for Sterling Equity. We'll pay for you to finish your degree at Georgetown. Night classes, online, whatever you need. But I want you in the room. I want you on the jets. When I walk into a meeting with the Chinese or the Saudis, I want you next to me." Sabrina looked at the check, then at Julius. "Vice President, I haven't even graduated." "And Steve Jobs didn't finish college," Julius countered. "Results matter more than pedigrees. You saved $1 billion deal tonight. That is your diploma." Sabrina sat back, the weight of the offer settling on her shoulders. It was terrifying. It meant leaving the world she knew, even if that world was miserable, for a world of sharks like Preston and Eleanor. "What about the others?" Sabrina asked. "People like Elena. They'll say I slept my way to the top. They'll say I'm unqualified. They'll whisper." "Let them whisper," Julius said, a cold smile touching his lips. "Lions do not lose sleep over the opinions of sheep. And besides," he took a sip of his drink, "after what you did to Preston tonight, I don't think anyone will be eager to cross you." Sabrina looked down at her hands. They were rough, chapped from detergents and hot water. Hands that had scrubbed floors and carried heavy trays. She made a fist. "I have conditions," Sabrina said, her voice strengthening. Julius raised an eyebrow, amused. "You're negotiating already?" "Good. Name them." "1," Sabrina said, holding up a finger. "I finish my degree, on campus. I need that for myself. I need to finish what my mother wanted for me." "Done," Julius nodded. "We'll work your schedule around it." 2, she continued. "I don't fetch coffee. I don't book flights. I don't pick up dry cleaning. If you want an assistant, hire Henry." Julius chuckled. "Agreed. You are an executive. Executives don't fetch coffee." "And 3, Sabrina said, her eyes locking onto his. "If we see Brenda from L'Orangerie, you let me handle it." Julius threw his head back and laughed, a genuine, loud sound that filled the cabin. "Miss Jenkins, I wouldn't dream of interfering. That woman is all yours." The intercom chimed softly. The pilot's voice came through, smooth and professional. "Mr. Sterling, Ms. Jenkins, we are beginning our final descent into Teterboro. We should be on the ground in 20 minutes. Welcome home." Sabrina looked out the window again. Below them, the world was appearing, the sprawling, glowing grid of the tri-state area, the arteries of highways flowing with red and white lights, and there, in the distance, the island of Manhattan. It looked different tonight. Yesterday, looking at the city from the ground up, it had felt like a fortress built to keep her out. The skyscrapers were walls she couldn't climb. The penthouses were castles she wasn't allowed to enter. It was a city that demanded everything and gave nothing. But from here, from 40,000 feet, it looked like a circuit board, a map, a game board that she finally knew how to play. She wasn't going back to the apartment in Queens to wait for an eviction. She was going back to pack. She was going to buy the building if she wanted to. Sabrina picked up the check. She folded it neatly and placed it inside the pocket of the trench coat, the coat that was now hers. "Henry is waiting with the car," Julius said, fastening his seatbelt. "Where should he take you? Back to Queens?" Sabrina shook her head. She thought about the empty fridge, the peeling paint, the silence of a life on pause. Then she thought about the future. "Take me to the St. Regis," Sabrina said. "I think I can afford a room for the night, and I have a 9 a.m. meeting with the Dean of Georgetown to schedule. I need a good night's sleep." Julius smiled. He raised his glass one last time. "To the future, Sabrina." Sabrina clinked her glass against his. "To the hunt, Julius." As the wheels of the Gulf Stream touched the tarmac with a screech of rubber and smoke, Sabrina Jenkins didn't flinch. She simply took a sip of her champagne and watched the runway lights blur past, ready to step off the plane and into a life that was finally, truly, her own. Sabrina's story proves one thing. Your current situation is not your final destination. She was invisible to the world, just another waitress in a city of millions, until the moment came to show who she really was. She didn't win because she pretended to be rich. She won because she wasn't ashamed of her struggle. In a room full of people pretending to be powerful, the most powerful person was the one who knew what it meant to survive. Luck is just preparation, meeting opportunity. But courage? Courage is kicking down the door when opportunity knocks. What would you have done in Sabrina's shoes? Would you have spoken up to the billionaire or stayed silent? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and twists, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. See you in the next video.